Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining Grit Community today, and I'm excited to have Maureen as our thought leader. She's going to be speaking on the topic of inclusion and purpose in the workplace. So I will go ahead and kick it to you, and we'll get started.
Sure. So also, I talked a little bit about why these two topics for me and how they go together in my career and my background. Also going to talk about it from a leadership perspective. I know in the description I had framed it as that, but I think it's also like thinking about it about ourselves. And once you can figure out your own purpose within your role or career or whatever you're doing, you can lead others through it. So it's a little bit of mixture of talking about in leadership, but also helping us reflect on our own purpose. So first off, what is kind of the goal when we think about how do we create purpose for ourselves, for our team in their daily work? And I look at that through an inclusion lens. And I don't think that you can have a really strong hold on your individual purpose in your career without inclusion. And I think as a leader, you can't really bring people to help lead them to identifying what's motivating them, what their purpose is, without having inclusion first. I think inclusion is the groundwork for that. So that's what we're going to talk about. And really, the goal is how do we go about creating an environment where everybody thrives by unlocking their purpose through the lens of our unique identities? So, what I mean by that is in any sort of team or environment, in order to help people thrive, we want to identify whatever that purpose is. And one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this topic is because having worked in corporate social responsibility, I get a lot of people who will say, "Oh, that's so fulfilling. Wow, you have such a purpose in your job." And it's given me a lot of thought to think about how you don't have to work in DEI, you don't have to work in employee engagement, you don't have to work in corporate social responsibility to feel a strong sense of purpose to your work, and really inspired me to help others try to figure that out without having worked in those, those specific areas that people feel like, oh, there's such a really direct purpose to what you're doing. And so, how can we help others thrive in that sense? And how can we help individuals identify more of their purpose by understanding who they are as an individual and what they bring to the table? So, that's really the goal that we're figuring out today. And just, I feel like I know a lot of folks are familiar with what inclusion is, but I always like to put a definition out there just to make sure everybody's on the same page. In the areas that I work in, there's a lot of words that are used for different things, right? We hear belonging, we hear diversity, we hear equity. Those are all different than what inclusion is. And so inclusion is a sense of belonging, but where people really feel their true selves are valued and respected. And inclusion is a byproduct of having a diverse organization, of having an equitable organization, of having accessibility. Inclusion is that outcome. And then, kind of the next level from inclusion is that sense of belonging. So, making sure we're all, on the same page about what inclusion is. And of course, always like to toss in there the business case for inclusion, because anywhere I go, there is always individual or business case for DEI. There's always individuals who are still like, why? And so always like to throw some stats in there. The more diversity we have, the more inclusion we can have. And we know that it actually drives returns, it drives financial returns, it helps bring more motivated, more higher functioning workplaces. So it's something that's really important. And we'll also talk about why is purpose important too, and why is that such a driver. So, Amy, have you ever, I don't know, or maybe Jen, and welcome Joni, have ever seen the human deal framework? Is anyone familiar with this? Okay. Well,
No.
that's fun because I like sharing this with folks. So the human deal, and this is where we talk about more of the business case for purpose. So the human deal framework is a framework that was actually created by Gartner after a lot of research. They're an agency that works across huge Fortune 50, all kinds of major companies in the consulting space, and often used by HR professionals, especially. And they developed this framework to help companies look at their workforce from more of an employee people centric perspective. And they developed these areas as really ways to help individuals feel a stronger sense of value, a stronger sense of purpose, and a stronger sense of inclusion. Now, Gardner actually says these are overall things that any human being needs. And if you think about it, it is similar. It's a very evolved, updated way to think about also the hierarchy of needs that I think we're all familiar with, right? There's that basic. This is kind of that very top of the pyramid and expanding on that in that self-actualization space. And so this has been something that they have worked with employers on to really say, as an organization, how do we help people feel more valued, feel a stronger sense of purpose in, especially when you think about a corporate environment. I think in the nonprofit space, everybody ties their work to the company's mission, and or not the company, the nonprofit, the organization's purpose and their mission. And it's more easy to identify what that purpose and mission is. And you also don't always, inclusion is important in that space. But even obviously nonprofits who aren't practicing inclusive practices will often still find that their employees have that sense of purpose because of the mission. So this is really focused on, I think, more for-profit companies, because that's where people struggle more with, am I just helping the company make money? Is that my purpose? And I think, Amy, probably in what you do in sales, that's where I think people can struggle sometimes. And so Gartner just talks about a little bit of context around that. Basically, employees are asking for more now. Employees want to feel like a person, a human being. They don't want to just be making the company money. There's the flip side of that now too. We're hearing the next generation is like, we want to clock in and clock out and just get paid, and we don't want to have any other self ties to the organization. But I think companies that can look at the human deal framework and pursue it in conjunction with inclusion and finding that purpose will actually find they'll get a lot more out of their employees. And two areas that I highlighted here, and it's really more about what's in this Navy area, are the questions, right? So I feel invested is definitely where we find when you have that purpose and that purpose statement and understand what that is. And even they call it shared purpose. And then this is labeled personal growth, but I'm more focused on the I feel valued. So feeling valued is often an outcome of inclusion, right? So that's, again, even in this human deal framework, you have these two areas of inclusion and purpose crossing over. And then, of course, these other areas, I don't want to not focus on those, but this is a pretty in-depth model that you can read more about. But those are other areas, right, that employers need to think about to really help their employees feel valued and get the most out of them, feeling understood, right, which is also part of DEI and inclusion, feeling autonomous in their work and feeling cared for, right, which is a quality of an inclusive leader. So I love this framework because I really love the questions around the edge. I feel like that simplifies and makes it very easy as a leader to understand the things that your team needs, or even you need, to feel more satisfied in your role. So love that. And then just wanted to throw in a few traits of inclusive leaders. So obviously leveraging that model. Demonstrating empathy, of course, is important as an inclusive leader. Getting to know your teammates, and demonstrating micro inclusions. And that's not sometimes I use that term and I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but a micro inclusion is I'll give some examples because that's probably the easiest way to explain it. But a micro inclusion is thinking about even when you enter a Zoom meeting, and if you know you're working with individuals across time zones, instead of saying good morning. You greet everybody differently because it might not be morning where that individual is. So it's little things that you can do in your daily role that seem so small, or even in your daily life, right? This can be outside of the work environment too, where you are doing small things to make people feel seen. So I know if I work in a company where it's a totally different time of day than the rest of my coworkers, if somebody comes in the meeting and they say good morning, I might not feel seen, or like, oh, they don't realize that I work somewhere else. Another example is if you've ever been at, and I use Zoom a lot as an example because that's the world we live in. You ever walked into a Zoom meeting, or virtually walked into a Zoom meeting, and people are talking about a subject, you don't know what they're talking about, and you can't really get in the conversation? If you've ever had someone say, "Hey, Maureen, we're just talking about how this was on the news," and had somebody kind of bring you into that conversation, that's an example of a micro inclusion. So, wanted to elaborate on what that is. Obviously, inclusive leaders are flexible. They seek other perspectives and promote growth. So the reason I want to share these traits and these behaviors are because without doing these things first, you can't help people reach that next level of what they're feeling, a strong sense of purpose in their daily work, or what they're doing on a daily basis. You can't get there if you don't feel included, if you don't feel valued, if you don't feel seen. You won't be able to get to that next step. So these are really important things that you kind of have to check and make sure that you're doing before we even get to what is your purpose, what is driving you, what's engaging us, what's motivating us. So any questions or thoughts?
You're hitting these points, and I've always thought that was interesting because now there's like a framework of context around it, because sometimes you just do those things like innately. And I love how you kind of painted it out. And that is what inclusive leadership looks like, and making sure everybody has their place and feels involved. So I love this. I took a screenshot.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, it's simple things. But a lot of times I think what happens in terms of inclusion, or my experience, is we just forget about it. And it takes effort. And these all things like, oh, of course I demonstrate empathy. And these are things not even if you're the leader, but just to your peers, or I get to know my teammates, or, I'm flexible, I'm self-aware. But sometimes you have to consciously reflect on, am I really doing these things? Am I practicing micro inclusions so that people feel that sense of belonging, and then you can get them to that next step? So yeah, feel free to jump in with any questions or thoughts. So now let's get to talk a little bit more about the purpose side. Now that we've talked about inclusion, and I think hopefully you'll see kind of the ties between the two topics as we dig more into the purpose. But again, always like to give a definition of what are we talking about when we're talking about purpose. It's this big, audacious, it's our big, hairy, audacious kind of goal, thought in life, and it can seem overwhelming. And so my goal is to help you think about purpose in a little bit more of a smaller context, and not so overwhelming in this what is the meaning of life type of question, because that's a bigger, hard one. But I think that you can enhance your own experience and teammates and employees experience by breaking it down into a smaller chunk. So purpose, a belief that life matters and that you make a difference. That's the really big, right, definition, the big question we're all a lot of times struggling with. And then I think in a much simpler way, it's really the reason for which something exists, is done, made, or used. It can also be meaning intention for oneself. And that's more when we think about in the workplace, in our careers, that definition and how we get there. So and not to say that there aren't individuals in careers and roles where what they're doing on a daily basis is that big, huge definition for them. But I think there's also a lot of individuals who are in roles, whether it be in finance, technology, HR, sales, HR sometimes has an easier tie where people are feeling like, why am I doing this? Why is this important? Not feeling fulfilled because they're not making that tie to something that's important to them. So kind of going along with this second definition here, I'm not going to show you the whole video. And I apologize, there is a little curse word in it, but it's such a good explanation of kind of the point I'm trying to get across. I'm going to play it for you. And it's, again, similar to the human deal framework. This is based on some research that you can definitely read more about. There's several more videos. I think there might even be a TED Talk on it, but trying to tie basically the difference between saying that purpose in life is happiness versus usefulness. So I think it's a really good recap of that. And hopefully, can you hear it? Wait, let me.
I can't hear it.
I don't hear it just yet.
I'm trying to remember. There was like a special thing on Zoom so that folks can hear a video. Let me see here. Okay, let me try it again. I feel like. Can you hear it?
No.
Can you click on the closed captions so that we could see the captions?
Yeah, I'll do the, let's see if the closed caption works. I feel like there's a trick in Zoom. So when you play a video, people can hear it, but I cannot remember what. Let me just check one thing. All right, well, we at least do the closed caption if you don't mind reading from it. The message is still the same, and I'll explain it too.
Aside, and the purpose of life. The whole thing is kind of what the goal says. But here's the thing. Goal in itself. Well, I think most things we do in life are just like work. You go shopping, you have drinks, you have dinner, you buy a car. That others can use.
Okay, so what she's really, the reason I like that video, and if you are to look up the goal of getting to happiness as being useful, and I think useful is kind of a strong term that we can be very black and white about. You have to be useful, but I think what it's really kind of drawing out of us is, and I like what she says about we're chasing happiness and experiences, and that will make you happy, but it's not giving you more of that purpose, right? You need to mix that in, right, to be happy, but it's not giving you that reason to necessarily get up every day. And so you're constantly buying things, you're trying to find experiences or things to do to fill that hole. And we're always being told the meaning to life is happiness, and that's the ultimate goal. And her point is that truly figuring out ways that we are useful. And when I think of useful, I think of impact. So how are we impacting others to improve their lives or to improve the world? That's where we can find a bigger sense of purpose that really drives us. And so it ties to this definition of which something exists to be used, to be made, and that in our lives, creating something or doing something or being useful to others really helps drive our purpose. Now, whether or not you look at that perspective from the greater outside of your daily life, I think is one thing, but I think of that in terms of your daily work and in positions where you typically feel most fulfilled, most motivated, or where you feel most useful. I don't know if anybody's ever been in a job where it's nice not to be busy all the time, but eventually that gets old, and not feeling like you're contributing, not feeling like you're using your brain, not feeling like the organization needs you. And that can be, pretty demotivating. It can seep into other areas of your life versus positions where obviously not being burnt out, but where you feel valued, where you're using your brain, where you're using your knowledge, where you feel like you are actually doing something that's helping others or being used by others. And so that's really what I like to think about when I think about purpose and looking at in terms of your job or career. So in tying these concepts together, seeing how they're similar, inclusion makes you feel valued, seen, comfortable. And purpose makes you feel motivated, engaged, happy. So when we can bring those two together, when you can feel fully belong in a team or an organization or a group, in addition, then getting to that next step of also feeling useful in your work, of feeling motivated, engaged, and you will get to that happy point. So it's how can we make these things work together? So I'll stop right there. Does anybody have any other thoughts about the tie around like purpose and usefulness in jobs, or examples of like jobs or work that they've done where either they feel super useful and purposeful or not? Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, I'll share. So I was the last company I worked at, I was like the in-house sales trainer for a certain part of the medical company. And it was, I was really busy during that time. And then I transitioned into being a consultant, and little by little, I just felt like I was kind of getting pushed aside, and decisions were being made, or I wasn't included in team discussions. And it's exactly what you just said, it was really demotivating. Like I felt useless. I mean, I honestly felt like I was robbing them by them paying me to do what I was doing, because I didn't really feel like I was a part of the team anymore. So yeah, that really hit home when you said that.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. I've had those roles as well, and yeah, it's not motivating. You don't want to. You don't have any reason to go above and beyond either. It's very demotivating. And when in the workplace, when we talk about motivation, which Amy, I'm sure in your career you're very, that intrinsic and external and all these factors, there's always those factors when it comes down to play. But like you said, you had the external reward, you had the paycheck, but you still weren't motivated because you didn't feel needed, you didn't feel useful, you didn't feel like a part of the team, a part of the organization. So there's always that motivation piece that comes into play, but to get that sense of really truly purpose within an organization, you have to feel useful to the team, to other people around you. So I think that's a great example.
This is
Thanks.
really helpful to give context to organizations who are trying to do more around these practices, but they don't really understand the nuances, the communication needed, the fine points. This is really kind of helping me have more context, and yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah, I think I think for me, having worked in this social impact space and DEI space, it seems like a lot of times it's this fuzzy, not so concrete thing, and we're talking about it in a loose way. And I think by drilling down to actual like behaviors that drive inclusion, and then what thing can you pinpoint to drive purpose, helps it make it easier to actually execute on it. I've spent a lot of times in organizations at companies trying to help figure out what's the overall purpose of the company, and it gets so caught up in purpose statements and things like, what does this even mean? Like, what are we even talking about? And I think that's because it becomes so overwhelming when you use the word purpose. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. Just trying to break it down a little bit more into more bite size, like, okay, today, how can I feel some purpose in my role or whatever I'm doing? And so that kind of is the next thing. It is in practice, right? What does this actually look like? And like, what are some questions or things that we can do? Let's say that our team, our organization has a high sense of belonging. We are diverse, we feel equitable, everybody feels valued. But now people are feeling like they can bring their authentic selves. How do we help them feel that tie to their role and what they're doing on a daily basis, or for yourself, right? So you're feeling good about that, but then you still might not be like, why am I doing this? Again, am I just helping? I love the company, I love my team, but am I just helping the company sell things? Or am I just doing the accounting? How do I now get to that next step of figuring out what's the actual purpose that can motivate me every day? So, in practice, and I'm always not a good example because of, the work, but I'll give you an example too. A lot of it has to do, and that's what we just talked about, is clarity, is developing clarity for individuals to help them and yourself really come to a conclusion about what makes you feel useful, what are you doing that is useful to others, to the organization, to the world, and how do we build that environment? And so this is talking in terms of more you as a leader, right? So what type of environment? In addition to inclusive behaviors, I think it is opening the door for a discovery for individuals. So once individuals can feel like they have a sense of belonging and they're being their true authentic self, can really start that discovery phase of what does motivate me. Is my motivation, I think an example is if I work for a company, is my motivation the actual work that I do, or is it the work that the company does? Is the company doing it? Are they in healthcare? Are they in, I don't know, hospitality? Whatever that is, I can discover more about like what my passions are. So as a leader, and we'll talk about some discovery questions here in a minute. Identifying connections. And this is one that I think is so important. And when we talk about the statements, making that connection to what I'm doing on a daily basis, how it connects to the bigger picture. So really making that small. So one example I can think of is I was speaking to a group, I think it was actually a focus group about career advice. And again, got the question of, well, I really want to work in social impact. I really want to, I'm currently a manager for a tech company, and that's not really fulfilling. And we actually just talked a little bit about, okay, but how is that fulfilling? And how do you as a manager improve the lives of your employees every day when they go home to their family because you created an environment where they feel valued, where they feel like they are part of a team. Because we've all had jobs, right, or leaders that aren't so great, and we go home and we treat our family a certain way, or we're frustrated or depressed. So I think it's making those connections to individuals. And, he was very passionate about helping people make that next step in their career too. And like, how can that be more of your purpose? It doesn't have to be that you all are computer engineers. It doesn't have to be that what the company does, but it can be more of like identifying that connection between what you enjoy doing and how does it impact others. Obviously making space for authenticity, for people to be real. I think as a leader, when you're going through the exercise of helping individuals identify what's their bigger purpose in the role, let people be real. Sometimes folks are going to say, or even with yourself, working in this job is really not what I want to do long term. And that may not be what you want to hear, but that's okay. Because truly, even the time that they spend in that job and role is going to be better with an individual feeling like they can be truthful, they can be authentic, versus having to hide that. So, you're going to be in situations where obviously it's not great if somebody's like, I'm job searching tomorrow and planning to leave here. But if they say, hey, my long-term goal is, I want to go work at a nonprofit that does this, and that's really my long-term goal. Great. What skills and things can we do here to help you be in HR, accounting, or finance in that nonprofit? And promoting growth. So I think this is so important. Just obviously, as any leader, and to build an inclusive environment is to promote growth in terms of career, but I think it's also to help promote growth for identifying how folks can become better versions of themselves as well. So this is where thinking more about that inclusion and getting to know people and what they need and helping them to grow comes into play. But this is, how do you create that environment for folks to have more clarity about what their purpose is on a daily basis in their role. Let me see here. Okay, so this is when we talk about discovery and creating that environment for clarity. What are questions to consider? And so these are things that more you as yourself, and then again, if you're kind of helping guide your team as an activity per se, you might, as a team activity, you might help people guide through this process of developing what their, I like to say, micro purpose, and I'll give an example of that micro purpose is, in that, what do we do? What does the company do? What do we do as a team? So looking at what is the overall what we do, what unites us. So an example I can think about, and again, I always say I'm not a great example because of the roles that I've had, but for example, I started my career in HR and actually did some recruiting for a little bit. And so when I think about what united us as a team, it was that continual drive every single day to get individuals in the right job and making sure that people were getting into roles where they could be successful, right? So that was something as a team, the right hire was always what we were focused on, right? So what we do was we were hiring individuals, but what united us as a team is that drive and the success of the team by getting folks in the right seats. What motivated us, right? So, and this can be what motivates me. So me as an individual in that role, what motivated me is I just love talking to people, and I specifically worked with college students, love talking to college students. That motivated me. It inspired me. Loved talking to individuals about, getting into that first job. But what motivated us as a team was to hit our numbers, right? So that's looking at both those things. And then what is the impact, right? And in that type of job, obviously the impact was you were helping someone get their first job, right? But I think you can look at this through any role, and even thinking about, and I'll give my example here. I'm in a communications role now, which is a different way to look at it, and what's your overall impact? And so these are things that you can ask yourself as you figure out in your role, what is your micro purpose, and then as you help individuals figure that out. So want to give some examples, but these are my macro and micro purpose. So my macro big career purpose statement, working corporate social responsibility is, right, I help companies leverage their resources to make a positive impact on society, right? If you are in IT, it could be that you are driven to help advance technology within companies to drive innovation, right? It can be, and you don't have to have this big macro statement. I think this is something that, as a career goal on your own, but really, I really want to focus on, and what we've kind of been talking today is more of these micro purpose examples and breaking it down. But I like to give the macro too. So my micro purpose example in my role right now is I'm doing, like I mentioned, DEI and social impact communications. But really, it's not about DEI. It's not about social impact. What I'm doing every day that motivates me, that helps me feel useful in the organization, is that I am making information clearer for employees. So it frees up their time of trying to research, find information, so that they can focus on developing life-saving technology. Because I'm working in a healthcare company right now. So if you think about a communications individual, right, they might feel like all they're doing is writing some information, posting something on the internet. But how do I feel used for the organization, and how is that helping other people? I'm helping make it clear. I'm helping making it easier, right? So that's when you think about if you really ask those questions, and also helping individuals find that, that little tie to what the organization does. And I think it can be done in any role. So an example I can think of, an office manager role. That individual is running processes, efficiencies every single day that makes it easier for the company to do whatever work that it's doing, or it helps individuals be stress-free when they come into the office and things are organized and they don't have to look for things and they have a friendly face to help them find things, right? So it's removing stress from other people's lives. So there's tons of examples we can talk about, but it's really about finding those small ways that you're feeling useful and making improvements for others. So I want to stop there because I just unloaded a lot of information, but wanted to get your thoughts about, one, is this kind of coming together, making sense? Do you have any examples of, roles or jobs you've been in where you can think about it maybe didn't feel like you had this purpose or usefulness, but now thinking back, or individuals you've had on your teams where it's like, oh, okay, we can make this tie to really help an individual feel that purpose? And Amy, do you ever have individuals that you coach like struggle with this a little bit on the sales side, like trying to really figure out that they're burnt out on the career, or trying to figure out how to stay motivated?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting when you brought up Gartner earlier, because I actually just did I did a webinar yesterday, and I talked about how, according to Gartner, 89% of people in sales and business development post-pandemic say that they're more burned out than ever. And it's called seller drag. It's this new phenomenon. And so they say one of the best ways to get through that is through personal and professional development, and for companies to offer advancement opportunities and to have more staying conversations, which is when you're talking to an employee about, what do you like about working here? What do you want to see different? And not waiting until somebody quits or leaves to have that conversation about, what do you want to see different? So yeah, definitely see this a lot.
Do you think that's interesting in the stay conversations? Do you think that discussions like this, because a lot of times, right, is the stay conversation about finances or promotions, right? Do you think that there's an opportunity for coaching too around what's deeper than that? What, is there not a motivation? Is there a deeper motivation that's not there that we need to help get individuals to?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And part of what I also focus on is, and Jennifer and Joni know this already, but I also work with people on their habits. So we look at 6 habits, like your confidence, your ability to connect with people, your ability to feel joy and fulfillment in your work you're doing. And, there's a list of them, but part of what I also do is not just with it. If it's a team of people, I'll do a team DNA report. Well, everybody will take this one assessment and then we'll see where the team is. And we find a lot of times, people are really lacking in their people skills, or they're lacking in their self-confidence, and that's dragging the energy of the whole entire team down. So it's, yeah, it's really interesting and fascinating. And the biggest thing to think about too is it's not a snap your fingers overnight change. It takes, it's like all hands on deck. Everybody's got to be committed, from the leadership down to the
Mhm.
team members, to drive a change like this in a company.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
That's what
for
I've
sure.
noticed.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think even from, so many companies are trying to implement DEI, right? And
Right.
there's so many moving parts of that, and it's so hard to embed into the culture. The diversity part they can figure out. They can do a lot of things to make sure there's equity, but at the end of the day, getting to that inclusion piece where people feel truly like they can be authentic, like they're bringing their whole selves, that the pieces of them that they feel like are valuable are being leveraged, is really a whole another level. And a lot of companies are doing it well, but then they're still feeling this, something's not something's not clicking. What's missing? People are burnt out still. People are not motivated. And, then comes the company saying, oh, we need to do charitable work. We need to come up with this big purpose statement. We need to show everyone that we're like doing good in the world, even if it's not,
Right.
even no matter what the company is. And but that doesn't trickle down in the organization to an individual experience. And I think that's where companies really struggle, is bringing it down to an individual experience. And that, I think, whereas we miss the mark a lot, down to any employee of any level in the organization, it doesn't transfer.
Right.
Something that I did in my several of my roles is when it was performance review time, um, talking with people about what they wanted to do next.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was a two-way conversation, that I, as their manager, could plan ahead for when things were coming up, new initiatives that I could delegate and help them grow, as opposed to try to do more myself, or just assign them to things without knowing what their interests were. And if they had the interests, but not maybe some of the experience or skills, help give them little things to develop them so that they'd be ready for more in the areas where they wanted to grow. Where I had those options, that was, it was a great way to grow them and engage them, and kind of seed the stay conversation, give them reasons to stay
Yeah.
ahead of time.
Yep.
And
I
it worked
totally,
really well.
yeah. I think breaking it down for people like that is super helpful, right? That they can grow. And it's that part of that, creating that clarity that we talked about, is that development and growth, right? It allows for the discovery, it allows for the growth. Then they can start really making those connections to, hey, maybe I don't need to leave the company. Maybe I don't need to go off and do something completely different, or try to save the world. Maybe there are things within this organization and even within my role that are going to be more satisfying if I can break it down and look at it from that perspective. Because so often, having worked in the social impact space, folks really jump to the conclusion when they're burnt out, that they need to go off and do some very philanthropic or charitable or environmental something, to feel fulfilled. And that's just where folks often jump. And I've just found, if folks can break it down and look at it from a different perspective, it's like, oh no, I am doing something really on a daily basis that's impacting people, or really helping people and making lives better, even if it's not this big grand thing. So I love that, you have those conversations in your performance reviews, because the world is so burnt out after COVID. And I think that's what we're all still trying to navigate through, and helping people identify what's keeping them, motivated and feeling that usefulness. So I
Now,
love
I
that.
think it
That's great.
empowers people by being proactive. I've opened a conversation that they can now come to me and say, hey, they feel more free to express interest. where I feel like traditionally people get the message that it's like somehow your manager is going to read your mind and know what your interests are, or that there is a
Mhm.
set career path, or there's a couple career paths, and that your manager is going to be looking out for you, and they may or they may not.
Yeah.
And so it kind of opens that conversation for it to be a two-way street. I'm telling them I'm
Mhm.
interested in their life. I'm interested in what they want. And so if there's something that I don't see, it empowers them to initiate a conversation.
Yeah, and that's definitely practicing inclusion. Like you're inviting them to open up and invite that, make that space for folks to be honest and transparent about what they're interested in and what they want to do. And hopefully in that discovery leads them to really identifying like what will motivate them in the future. So I think that's such a great, I think that's a great example of like this whole process of creating an inclusive space through inclusive practices that allows people to have that discovery, have that reflection, and get to a point of next steps in their job, in their career, what they're doing that can be more fulfilling than how they're feeling right now. So I love that. Great example. I know we're at the end of time, and that was pretty much all I had. I just had a few like, always like to wrap up with what can you do with this information? Obviously always execute on inclusivity. I'm always gonna plug that. But if you don't already in your role, if you want to take on the big task of writing, your grand life purpose statement, that is awesome. Tell me how you do that because that's one that I have yet to tackle. But in terms of your professional career and what you do, write your own purpose statement. It doesn't you don't have to have a big purpose statement. Write your micro purpose. It could be a different micro purpose every single week. You could start your week that way. And it's, similar to writing goals, but just looking at it from a different perspective. Always being curious about yourself and your others. Like I said, that purpose statement can change on a regular basis. And making those connections. That's really what it is. It's about making what you do, what you're interested in, and tying it to a bigger picture. And give yourself grace because it's hard. Even when you know that purpose, you sometimes still feel like it's not enough, or you're not still feeling fulfilled enough. So always give yourself grace and give other people grace. And it's okay to not always have a purpose in mind. Again, I think it can be overwhelming. I think it's a very audacious thing in life to talk about purpose, but give yourself grace and break it down and then look for those little moments where you feel like, okay, I'm feeling fulfilled. I'm feeling useful in what I'm doing. And I think that's the key word when I think folks are so like, look at what's making you feel useful. And then that'll help you tie that purpose. Got any other questions or discussion points from anybody? Any feedback or other thoughts?
This was awesome.
No, this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a good discussion. I love talking about this stuff. And I'm always learning in this space too. So if you have other thoughts or things you want to share, always feel free to send them my way, especially because there's so many different perspectives on this type of thing. But this is just a practice that I've had when I've led teams and for myself. That's really, I think, helped bring a different lens on motivation to individuals. So don't have to save the world to be doing good stuff every day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Anything else from you, Jennifer, that
No, I was just going to say
um,
thank you so much for this incredible content and this presentation. I'm going to make sure it's accessible on our Grit community talk show page so people can access it later who aren't able to join us today. So thank you so much for this incredible content.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it was nice to meet Amy and Joni, and thank you so much for your contribution. It was a really great discussion. So if you ever want to chat again on any of these topics, I definitely geek out about this stuff and would love to. So
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, enjoy the rest of your
Nice
day and
to see
thank
you
you
all.
again.
thanks, everybody. Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.